1988, Guangzhou, China. Norway win an international 12-team soccer tournament for women, a dress rehearsal for a very significant occasion. Next month, the finest players in the world return to the Cantonese capital for the first FIFA World Championship of Women's Soccer. 65 countries, 10 million players. Around the world, women's soccer is blossoming. The World Cups come not a moment too soon.
Thank God, finally. We've been holding out for 10 years now for a World Cup, and finally it's here.
It's going to be very important for the whole women's football movement because it's the first officially recognised tournament at world level.
It's very exciting. Now a player can realise her own ambitions, and this has only been made possible with the introduction of such an exciting event as the World Championship.
12 teams have qualified for China and have been placed into 3 groups of 4, with the best 8 nations going forward to the knockout stages of the tournament. It's believed that women's first involvement in the game was back in the 12th century. French women began to take part in the folk football or mob games of the time. The peasant women would tussle for a ribboned leather ball in a game called La Soule. At Culloden in Scotland, where in 1746 Bonnie Prince Charlie was defeated by the English army, the married and single women of the area played against each other in a crude form of football in the 18th century. But in 1863, the rules of this primitive game were standardized, outlawing violence. It was this move, coupled, rather surprisingly, with the advent of the bicycle, that propelled women's involvement in the game forwards. It was the bicycle that spawned what became known as the rational dress movement. Across the world, women began to wear less restrictive clothing, allowing them more involvement in sport. Nettie Honeyball from London is believed to have founded the world's first team for women in 1894. The following year, 10,000 people watched the inaugural match of the British ladies team. And in Canada, Southside Rangers, a team from Edmonton, also began to play. Soccer also gathered interest among French women. By 1910, teams like Rouge Sportive and Femina Sport were created. But it took the First World War and the changes in attitudes towards the new working woman in society to bring about the first real explosion of interest in women's soccer. This was particularly so in England and France, where factory teams began to play games to entertain and raise funds for the war effort. Crowds flocked to grounds to see the newly liberated woman playing a man's game. Alice Stanley had fond memories of those days.
I was asked to get this team up, but I wasn't interested then because I thought Mother wouldn't approve of it.
Why wouldn't she approve of it?
Well, of course, you know, Victorian. She didn't like the idea of ladies playing football. But I played without her knowing.
Alice Stanley went on to play for Britain's foremost club of the time, the Dick Kerr's Ladies, a factory team from Preston in northern England. Perhaps it was training like this that prompted the celebrated playwright Oscar Wilde to announce,
"Football is all very well as a game for rough girls, but it's hardly suitable for delicate boys."
In 1920, Dick Kerr's Ladies played against Femina from Paris in the first international match. And that same year at Goodison Park, home of Everton Football Club, 53,000 people turned out to watch the Dick Kerr's Ladies in a charity match. A further 10,000 were locked outside. Women's soccer was flourishing. Comic strips appeared in football magazines. The heroes were all women. Dick Kerr's Ladies had already raised over £70,000 for charity. But in December 1921, the All-Male English Football Association changed the face of the women's game almost forever by banning all its clubs from allowing women's teams to use their grounds. Astonishingly, the ban was kept in effect for 50 years.
I think we were getting better crowds than the men were getting and making more money for charity. And they didn't like it.
Sadly, this was to be Alice Stanley's last interview. The French Federation followed the chauvinist example of their English counterparts some years later. Although teams played on where they could, raising money for charity, the women's game fell into rapid decline. It wasn't until the 1950s that interest in women's soccer was rekindled. The game started to develop in Germany, Denmark, Czechoslovakia and Italy. Girls were beginning to play the game at school, and the level of skill started to improve rapidly. In 1971, an unofficial World Cup was held in Mexico. In the final, the host nation lost 3-0 to a Danish team before 100,000 spectators. In 1991, the official flag of FIFA presides over women's international soccer. Women from all the continents of the world at last have their own World Cup. It's created so much interest that the Danish team have even recorded their own World Cup song.
Vi går på banen for Danmark. Det er de røde, hvide farver, der vil. Vi er friske og viser det allerbedste spil. Vi står parat til at give den en tand for vores lille land. Vi er de danske fodboldpiger. Vi vil hele vejen op. Dannebrog til tops. Friske, når vi sammen går på banen og siger. Vi er de danske røde, hvide fodboldpiger.
And next week, we'll be meeting up with two potential stars of the first World Cup.